I really don't like beating a dead horse, but in this situation, it's just kind of the way things are going. And this one is a little bit more interesting because this goes over everything. So if you don't know, Bungie is in boiling hot water, and things just keep getting worse. But this is not a thing that's new. This is a thing that's been going on for years and years and years and years. And this downfall of Bungie has been insane. So someone who I haven't watched before, Akshan, probably saying that wrong, created this video. And I started watching maybe the first 10 seconds of it. I'm like, this is going to be good. Let's watch this on TV. So here we go. This thing, I'm fascinated by this because this is going to be studied. This is going to be studied down the road. But
Bungie was
I guess this is the downfall of Bungie.
once the most beloved game developer in the world. They're the studio that created Halo, the minds that forged Destiny. But things,
By the way, Halo 3, Destiny 1 and 2 are like 3 of my favorite games of all time.
changed so drastically over the last few years that the company is almost unrecognizable. Huge waves of layoffs, lawsuits from ex-employees, and hush money flying around to keep everyone quiet.
I don't know about no hush money. This is going to be interesting.
It's a conspiracy that goes all the way to the top of the company, when one man, one spy, seized control of it all
Spy?
and has been driving Bungie into the ground ever since. A shell of its former self,
I didn't expect this to be a spy thriller, okay?
Bungie is ready to release their next game, Marathon, in 2025, but the hype is already gone.
Okay, so already I can tell that he started to make this video around the time of the alpha for Marathon. And I'm assuming he's going to, because this came out 4 days ago, I'm assuming he's going to go over what went on with Marathon's stealing of art. But I don't think he had that when this started. So
It would all begin with one deal which would change Bungie's fate forever, which happened back in
Sony-
1999
Microsoft.
when Bungie was acquired by a little-known company called Microsoft.
They then
For
get bought by
years,
Sony
Bungie
later.
had been an up-and-coming rock star in gaming. They developed a few huge hits, but needed financial backing to get
Marathon.
their latest project, Halo, off the ground. Microsoft offered them the money and resources they needed, as well as the support of the Microsoft brand. On paper, it was the opportunity of a lifetime, but the transition didn't go as smoothly as they'd hoped. Bungie wasn't used to deadlines and business plans, worrying about shareholders and stock prices. And once the team moved from Chicago to the Microsoft campus in Redmond, Washington, they started to meet Microsoft execs who didn't exactly jive with Bungie's way of life. For Bungie, it was all about being creative, trying new things, and having fun. For Microsoft, making games was all about money, streamlining the creative process into an assembly line to create and sell content. Typically, when acquiring a new company, Microsoft would absorb them into their way of life. For Bungie, that meant putting everyone on the same floor of some unmarked office building, having them file into their identical cubicles on Monday morning, and telling them to slave away to finish the game before
So this was before, like, you know, when you look at, like, this was before Facebook, right? So actually, I don't know the exact date, but I believe it's before Facebook, which was before tech companies had the whole cool, we sit on beanbag chairs and eat seaweed kind of vibe.
end of the quarter. But Bungie wasn't about to be another cog in the machine. Bungie made it clear to their new employers that they were different from the other studios that came before them. If Halo was going to get finished, it was going to be on their own terms.
Wicked.
Receiving the message loud and clear, Microsoft backed off and let the team get to work. With
Awesome.
Microsoft off their backs, it was time to focus on finishing Halo. Step 1 was to figure out what kind of game it was going to be. Originally, they envisioned an RTS and then a third-person shooter before finally landing on the first-person shooter we know today.
By the way, they did
This
make an RTS.
would turn out to
Halo
be the
Wars.
right choice.
A game so far ahead
Players
of
were
its time.
put right in the middle of the action, meleeing elites, hopping into vehicles, and seeing through the eyes of Master Chief. With the incredible 3D graphics, the open world level designs, and the iconic soundtrack and story, creating an FPS felt like the right choice. And when Halo released alongside the original Xbox on November 15th, 2001, people were blown away. Halo sold over 1
2001.
million units in its first few
Definitely
months,
before
and
Facebook.
Microsoft immediately asked Bungie to start working on a sequel. Eager to continue building on the universe they just created, they agreed, but had to reconsider their position because they didn't receive nearly as much money from the first game's success as they had expected. Apparently, Microsoft wasn't big on profit sharing, and if
Of
Bungie
course
figured
not.
out a way to negotiate out of their
Well, like,
contract,
Microsoft makes
they could
enough
go
money.
back to being independent and potentially make a lot more money. But Microsoft knew they had something special and wanted to make sure Bungie stayed with the company. So, for Halo 2, they went to the negotiating table. Bungie knew they had a lot of leverage given the success of the first game, but needed some help dealing with Microsoft. So, they hired someone they thought would be the perfect fit for the job, a Microsoft exec named Pete Parsons. But this new employee had an agenda of his own, and one day, way down.
So that's who he okay. That's
the
who he labeled
line,
as a spy.
He'd be the reason for Bungie's downfall.
Interesting.
For now, though, he was just the new guy. In the 90s, Pete was the director of Xbox game marketing. During the development of Halo CE, he apparently fell in love with what Bungie was doing and wanted to get involved. So he applied for the role of studio manager, and given his experience at Microsoft, he felt like the perfect fit. He was hired in 2002 and would be the new person dealing with Microsoft on Bungie's behalf, discussing things like marketing, planning, and negotiating. For Halo 2, Bungie wanted assurances that their hard work wouldn't just be to line the pockets of
Second
Microsoft.
best
They
Halo
wanted
game.
their cut, especially if the game was successful. So, Microsoft agreed to work something out. Second, Parsons had to deal with Microsoft's unrealistic expectations for how long it would take to finish the game. Everything about Halo 2 was going to be bigger, better, and shinier, but they would need more time and resources to accomplish them. Microsoft initially wanted Halo 2 to release in 2002, less than 1 year after Halo Combat Evolved. The Bungie team made it clear that this would be impossible, and if Halo 2 was going to be a proper sequel, they'd need a lot more time than that.
More time. Yeah, everybody needs a lot more time.
They convinced Microsoft to extend the deadline to 2004. It wasn't much time by today's standards, but it was enough that the team felt like they could breathe.
It's still a lot, though. Like when you think about it, it's essentially 3 years. Launched Halo 1 in 2001 and then launched in 2004. That's like a Call of Duty cycle at this point, right? Much less employees and much less funding and stuff behind it. But like for the time, that was a long time. Like now it's like, what do we have? GTA 6, which is like looking like 5 to 7 years of development time, probably a little bit more than that. We had like Concord. What was Concord? Like 8 years or something like that?
The little. One of the first things they started working on was a tech demo to show fans at E3 2003. And what they created, well, it blew people out of their seats. But the demo they created was smoke and mirrors. The Bungie team had gotten so excited to show off all the new things their engine could do, things like dynamic lighting and revamped physics, that they got a little carried away. The demo was too good, and it would be impossible for them to create a full game that would live up to those standards. But they had to get it done, and Parsons began cracking the whip. He made it clear that there would be no deadline extensions, no canceling the project, and no lifeboat. Halo 2 was going to get finished whether the team liked it or not. What followed was one of the most infamous crunches in game development history. The team essentially lived at the studio, working day and night, and the devs nearly killed themselves trying to get the game out the door. Parsons, as studio manager, was blamed for the lack of planning that led to the inhumane work conditions, but the Bungie team...
So this Parsons guy is quite the piece of work. So he overworked the team like crazy, and apparently he's the one that then turns on the... This is going to be interesting.
Against all odds, managed to pull it off. When Halo 2 released, it was to resounding applause. The fans loved it. The critics loved it. It sold 2.4 million copies and generated more than $125 million in its first 24 hours.
Insane.
Microsoft was making money hand over fist, and it looked like the profit-sharing deal they made with Microsoft would make everyone at Bungie filthy rich.
But
Except for one thing. Microsoft backed out of the arrangement. The Bungie team was furious. Microsoft had lied to them. They refused to pay them what they had promised, and even worse, they were asking for yet another Halo game. Bungie was torn. They'd just been betrayed and were ready to walk away for real, but they also felt
So they probably still did get a bag, just not a very big bag.
at least had to finish Halo 3 for the sake of their fans. They powered through the development of Halo 3, a much smoother affair than Halo 2, and what they came out with was, well,
A
one of the
masterpiece.
greatest FPS games ever made.
Literally a masterpiece.
Halo 3 was lauded for its story, its multiplayer, its Forge and theater modes. It was breaking sales records left, right, and center, and proved the power of the brand new Xbox 360. But back at the studio, things couldn't have been worse. In the months before Halo 3's release, the team was unable to finalize a deal with Microsoft. Parsons was failing to make headway on negotiations, and two of the most important people working on Halo 3, founder Jason Jones and art designer Marcus Lato, straight up quit before being convinced to come back to the table.
This happens
As a show of
so
solidarity,
much.
Parsons
Like even in Call
also
of
offered
Duty.
to resign if he couldn't secure a deal. After some heated debate with other members of the team, Jones and Lato were convinced to stay. However, when the group was deciding what to do with Pete Parsons, a few members believed he'd been double dealing, playing Bungie to help out Microsoft. So they took him up on his offer to resign, saying goodbye to Parsons with a pizza party. With Parsons gone, Microsoft realized Bungie was serious about leaving, and the two parties finalized a deal on July 7th, 2007. The deal said that Bungie would develop two more Halo games, Halo 3 ODST and Halo Reach, before
Not
leaving
as
to
good as
become
Halo 3.
independent and hand off the Halo IP to the newly founded 343 Industries.
Which is like, that's a wild contract. I can't think of another situation where a developer that big handed off their IP in order to no longer be underneath I can't, like offhand, I can't think of anything.
In 2010. Microsoft would remain as a minority equity interest for the next few years as Bungie transitioned away. The deal was pretty good, but not being allowed to take the Halo IP with them is a decision many lament to this day. As Halo composer Marty O'Donnell put it,
"We should be independent. We should own our own IP. We should never let a big corporation own the intellectual property that we're creating. As creators, we should own our intellectual property."
when the news broke, fans were shocked. But even more shocking was what came next. But before we get into that, do you hear that? Do you know what that is?
That's a tank.
That's the most wonderful sound in the world. That's the sound of War Thunder. War Thunder is the biggest, baddest, beefiest vehicle combat game on the market, and it's free to play on PC, console, and a shiny new mobile app. Look at this thing. This bad boy can hold more than 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships from throughout
That's
history.
a whole lot of tanks.
They've got old school retro models like armored cars and biplanes from the 1920s for you fans of the classics, and modern models like the main battle tanks and fighter jets from the present day for you young guns. Each one can be decked out in real camouflages, historical flags, or whatever other cosmetics suit your tastes. Once you're done making your fighter jet nice and pretty, it's time to hit the battlefield. War Thunder will drop you right into the middle of epic PvP battles with more than 70 million other players and let you fight in some of the most iconic battles in military history. War Thunder is also available as a brand new mobile game, so you can fight your battles at home or on the go. As a limited time offer, if you enlist today, you'll receive a massive bonus pack open to new players and those who haven't logged on
always
in
a
at least
massive
6 months.
bonus pack.
This bonus pack includes the Eagle of Valor Vehicle Decorator, 100,000 Silver Lions, and 7 days of premium account. This deal is as good as it gets, and if you're on console or PC,
I've been
you can
sponsored by
access
them
the bonus
before.
pack right now through our affiliate links in the description below.
Mine didn't include
So,
Ryan Gosling.
what are you
but-
waiting for? Download
No.
War Thunder today. As I was saying, Bungie leaving Microsoft was a shock, but the biggest shock was yet to come. In 2010,
No, it gets
Bungie signed
more
a new
and more
contract
wild.
with one of Microsoft's biggest competitors, Activision. The contract was a 10-year,
I forgot
$500
about
million
this.
deal that would allow Bungie to have creative control over their new game and retain ownership of the
I
new
totally
Destiny
forgot
IP.
about this.
In exchange, Activision would be in charge of all publishing and marketing for the game, allowing the creative team at Bungie to focus on making the game. But this new partnership wasn't all sunshine and flowers. Sure, Bungie had managed to get away from Microsoft, but much like the Flood in Halo, they had some parasites aboard the ship who were destroying them from the inside. One of those was Harold Ryan. Ryan was a Microsoft playtester in the late 90s who was hired on at Bungie around the same time as Pete Parsons. When Parsons resigned in 2006,
I've seen that
Ryan
guy
took over
before.
his role as Bungie's studio manager.
probably why.
After the release of Halo 3, he was promoted to company CEO and would be in charge of overseeing ODST, Reach, and the upcoming game Destiny. To help get all of these projects off the ground, Bungie needed a marketing wizard who understood the games they were making. Up until this point, Marty O'Donnell had been doing the job, but he was struggling a little bit. So Ryan hired the only person he could think of, Pete Parsons.
Again.
As you'd expect, many veterans at Bungie were worried about the move, but justified it by saying that Parsons was a phenomenal marketer who would help them sell their games. Plus, with Bungie leaving Microsoft, there wouldn't be any conflict of interest. Still, it was hard to ignore the fact that Bungie suddenly had two ex-Microsoft employees in the highest position of the company. And once the deal with Activision was signed in 2010, it became clear that Microsoft's profits-first culture had infected Bungie. It started in 2011. With their newfound freedom, Bungie could take their new game in
So
what
this is going to go in the direction of what they did with the ridiculousness of microtransactions and DLC for Destiny. It gets insane.
direction they wanted. Unfortunately, not everyone was aligned, and divisions started to form. On one side, there were the business guys like Ryan and Parsons. On the other were the veteran creatives who actually made the games. Jamie Griesmer, the architect of Halo CE's 30 Seconds of Fun, Joe Staten, the man who wrote the Halo trilogy, Paul Bertone, design director, Marcus Lato, art director, and Martin O'Donnell, game composer and Bungie founder. Starting in 2011, in the midst of working on Destiny 1, those on the creative side of things started leaving the company rather unexpectedly. The first to leave was Jamie Griesmer. He cited burnout and frustration at the lack of direction Bungie had for Destiny 1. This was followed by Paul Bertone in 2012, then Joe Staten in 2013, and finally, Marcus Lato quit in 2014,
So they all
citing
left.
the crunch culture fostered by Pete Parsons as one of the main reasons for his leaving.
I'm like, wait, did we just get rid of the very best designer we've ever had? And he goes, yeah, we did. I'm like, okay, how does that make sense? Like, our total design power, went from here down to here, and with no plan on fixing the deficit. And he's like, yeah, you're right.
But it gets even worse. These creatives, some of whom made up Bungie's board of directors, began disappearing one by one, leaving people scratching their heads. One of those reasons was the fact that they had founder stock from when the company went independent in 2010, which would vest if they stayed with the company for a certain period of time. Rather than let these veterans have their founder stock, those we just listed were likely offered separation deals where they would be paid X amount of money in exchange for their resignation. On top of having the stock returned to Bungie, these deals had the added benefit of letting Ryan and Parsons stack the board of directors in their favor.
Probably
The
more
plan
Microsoft
was
people.
working, and they just had one more person to get rid of, Marty O'Donnell. But he wouldn't back down so easily. Seeing what was happening to those around him, Marty refused to accept any sort of deal, essentially daring the leadership to fire him. When they did fire him in 2014, he retaliated with a lawsuit, saying he was wrongfully let go and was due his founder stock. Not long after, he won the suit, confirming for many what was happening behind closed doors. Sadly, by 2014, the core Bungie creatives who carried Halo through the 2000s were mostly gone. Ryan and Parsons were now firmly in control of the company's direction. Thankfully, people were excited for their new game, whatever it would be. Following a huge marketing campaign from Activision, Destiny broke records with over 4 million pre-orders
Destiny killed
and made
it.
more than $500 million on day one. The game looked stunning. The gunplay felt great, and the guys that made Halo just hit another home run. At least, that's what it seemed like on day one. It quickly became apparent that the game wasn't quite finished when it came out. Missions were cut and pasted repetitively. The game's story was fractured, with much of the lore hidden behind grimoire cards that were only viewable on Bungie's website.
Which is
the
super
game's main
weird.
storyline had about 8 hours of total gameplay.
Yeah, 'cause
this
it
was
was
not
the
the massive
endgame
MMO
game.
shared world experience that Bungie had promised, and the game did not feel finished. Many pointed fingers at Activision for pushing Destiny out the door before it was done.
Probably
and of
their
course,
fault.
that was true. Activision during this time was
yeah,
known for
Bobby.
caring about one thing and one thing
They
only.
still are.
Money!
But there was other turmoil behind the scenes that made it difficult to finish the game on time. Destiny's development was fraught with issues, including the game's story being axed and pasted back together, and veterans leaving left, right, and center. Still, Destiny was a commercial success, and after several DLCs, the game started to take shape. Bungie fleshed the story out, they introduced raids and a ton of other story elements, and it finally looked like Destiny was going to reach
There
its full
was a
potential.
raid
But
pretty
then,
early on,
just when
but
Bungie looked like they were
the
about to
Vault of
redeem their
Glass.
game, two things happened. First, in 2016, Ryan stepped down as CEO, leaving the position to be filled by the one man we hoped would never sit on the throne, Pete Parsons.
Once again.
But second, they did something that really pissed players off.
They kicked a hole
They
in the door.
announced that they were ending Destiny 1. This
By the
was
way, this is like a more common thing than you may realize. Like, actually think about it for a second. This was a huge moment for Warzone as well. When they ended Warzone 1 and Warzone 2 came in, huge problem.
punch in the face for many players. They'd spent a lot of time in Destiny 1 progressing their characters, grinding for loot, and expecting the game to last for, well, more than 3 years. Destiny was a live service game, which meant people would, over a period of time, pay for DLCs and other updates with the expectation that the game would stay online. The understanding is that all the time and money they invest would carry over a period of years. Unfortunately, there was money to be made. The justification was that Destiny 1's game engine had some limitations that made it difficult for Bungie to keep updating the game, especially with the Xbox Series X and PS5 on the horizon. So, the only option was to rebuild the game in a new, modified engine. However, that meant a new, full-price game with all progression from the original being reset. Needless to say, people weren't too happy. But this was always the plan.
Why they weren't
Just 2
happy.
months after Destiny 1's release, Activision Publishing CEO Eric Hirschberg said in an interview, quote, "Work had already begun on future expansion packs, as well as on our next full game release. They revamped the progression system and put in a ton of new microtransactions, in-game currencies, expensive cosmetics in the Everstore, tons
So
of
how does that look? It looks like you create a new game so that you can put more microtransactions in it. And that's essentially what they did.
grinding. It felt like players were being forced to start over from level 1 so that Bungie and Activision could cash in on restarting their progression. And it only got worse as the years dragged on. Eventually, it became apparent that despite a large player base, Destiny 2 wasn't the cash cow they had hoped for. The Forsaken expansion in 2018 was critically acclaimed by fans, but Activision labeled it as a commercial failure, with Activision's COO saying Destiny 2, quote, was not meeting financial expectations. So, Activision and Bungie went into talks about parting ways. A few months later, and with some help, Pete Parsons negotiated with NetEase for a $100 million investment, and Bungie broke away from Activision in early 2019. From 2019 to 2022, Bungie was on a redemption tour.
So just to be clear, Microsoft, Activision, NetEase did a thing with them, and it's not done.
With many attributing it to their independence, but the honeymoon wouldn't last. Once again, after only 3 years of independence, Bungie started running out of money. Players who had been around for years were having the time of their lives, but the game wasn't bringing in new players and therefore actually wasn't making that much money. Fortunately, someone had their eye on Bungie for quite some time. Sony offered Parsons $3.6 billion to
How on earth they get that number of $3.6 billion is insane to
buy
me.
them out. Despite a history of being burned by Microsoft and oppressed by Activision, and despite knowing that this kind of thing usually ends badly, Parsons simply could not say no to that much money.
Because you know how much
So,
money of that
for the third
Parsons
time,
probably
Bungie
made?
was sold to the highest bidder. Thankfully, this acquisition felt much more equitable for Bungie. They wouldn't be beholden to developing exclusively for the PlayStation, they would be allowed to keep the Destiny IP and own any new IPs in the future, and there wouldn't be any layoffs. Sony viewed
For
Bungie
now.
as a key asset that would be a huge part of their 10-year live service plan, so they set aside $1.2 billion and put it towards employee retention, basically paying employees extra not to leave the company. In an industry like video games, this was a breath of fresh air.
Yeah, that
People
never
were
happens.
expecting a huge wave of layoffs, so it was a relief to see Sony welcoming them in with open arms.
Wait.
But it wasn't Sony they had to worry about, because the call was coming from inside the house. In 2023, Destiny 2's The Final Shape DLC and Marathon were
is
both
recent.
delayed
This is
due to a
recent, by the
wave
way,
of
like 2 years
layoffs
ago.
initiated by Pete Parsons. Parsons took to Twitter to share his condolences for those he just laid off, claiming that the commercial failure of D2's Lightfall DLC was part of the reason. Just a year prior, Sony had put $1.2 billion aside to keeping everyone around, and none of that money went into, well, keeping everyone around. But this was a drop in the bucket compared to what happened in 2024. The Final Shape would be the latest DLC for Destiny 2. Prior to its release, many felt that its success would dictate whether Bungie would have another round of layoffs or not. Thankfully, it ended up being both commercially and critically a smash hit. With all sorts of money coming in, employees finally felt like they were safe. So imagine their surprise when just 2 months later, on July 30th, 17% of the company, aka 220
That's
employees, were
insane.
laid off with no warning. Some were told in short meetings and asked not to spread it around. Some discovered they were let go when they tried to sign in the next morning and found themselves locked out of their accounts. Parsons put out his own condolences, saying, quote, "Today is a sad day at Bungie as we say goodbye to colleagues who have all made a significant impact on our studio." It was incredibly tone deaf, given the fact that he was the one who initiated the layoffs in the first place.
And why?
To make matters worse, employees were intentionally let go on the 30th of the month so Bungie wouldn't have to pay for their benefits. The exact same thing they did 1 year prior during the last round of layoffs. Some were even terminated a week before their maternity leave kicked in. And as though history were repeating
lawsuit
itself,
waiting to
the
happen.
whole issue of founder's stock came back into play. After going independent again, certain veterans had stock with vested interest, saying if they stayed with the company until X date, they would receive a certain amount of shares
Same
as
thing as
compensation.
before.
However, if they left the company for whatever reason, being laid off included, that stock would be forfeited and restored to Bungie the company. Throughout 2023 and 2024, plenty of veterans said goodbye to Bungie. Destiny 2 director Joe Blackthorne passed on the torch, game director Chris Barrett was fired, but this round of layoffs targeted some of the most important and most experienced devs at the company. Mark Noseworthy, who worked on Reach and both Destinies, Luke Smith, who is one of Bungie's most important devs since the Halo days, and Michael Salvatore, Marty O'Donnell's
Recognize that
co-composer on both Halo and Destiny. It's unclear if they were laid off or if they took separation deals like the ones back in the early 2010s, but either way, 3 of the last remaining Bungie veterans were all gone within days of each other. The blame fell squarely on Pete Parsons. It was his decision to
still
downsize
there?
and put people out of a job. Sony had tried to keep people around, but Bungie had initiated the layoffs. And throughout it all,
Anchorman.
Parsons spent more than $2 million on vintage cars. Yikes. These layoffs could not have come at a worse time. Bungie was gearing up to unveil a massive project they'd been working on for the past few years, but now they were missing almost 1/5 of their workforce.
That's a
the
lot.
game is called Marathon. Bungie released a few teasers throughout 2024, and on April 12th, 2025, the world finally got its first look at Marathon's gameplay.
Marathon
And no
is a
one
team-based
cared.
extraction shooter set around the mysterious and cutthroat world of Tau Ceti 4.
Ahead of the reveal, tons of creators were given early access to play the game and give viewers their thoughts. Unfortunately, the reception wasn't what Bungie had hoped for.
It seems like you're playing an extraction shooter that to me sometimes feels like a battle royale, and that's kind of it.
More and more information started coming out about it, and now I'm just like, it's not yet at disappointment, but it's more so towards confusion.
It wasn't yet a disappointment, but it will be very, very soon.
$40 for a live service game with all of the trappings.
Wait,
no
is this not even gonna have the stealing artwork in
proximity
it?
chat. What are you guys thinking?
The hype for the cinematic trailer in 2024 was all but dead, and this new extraction shooter felt like it was already late to the party. The issues are due to Bungie being in a leadership crisis. All of the veterans who made Halo and Destiny are basically gone, and many feel that Bungie employees are just staying to get the game out the door and plan to leave as soon as it releases. With so many key members gone from the company over the last 2 years, it's a wonder who's still around to develop
Leadership,
it.
this is
But
exactly-
the big question is, what will happen to Pete Parsons? Gamers from all around the world are calling for him to step down and
No
be held
kidding.
accountable for what's happening at Bungie, but as we all know, that doesn't happen to CEOs. More than likely, if Marathon fails, Parsons and the rest of the shareholders will be laughing to the bank while us players sit here and wonder
Probably.
whatever happened to the company that made Halo.
So he didn't
Thanks
have
again
it
to
in
War
there.
Thunder.
So he didn't have. We gotta look at the comments on this one. This is why I tell people Marathon isn't being made by Halo, Pete Parsons, and Bobby Kotick. Yeah, Bobby Kotick's gone now though. Honestly, Sony gave Bungie a bunch of money to prevent layoffs, and Bungie CEO did the layoffs anyway. See, this is the embezzlement is a big thing. So this is before the entirety of the stolen artwork thing happened, which we have another video up for that one. I enjoyed this probably just as much, if not more, than the dive into the artwork thing. But what I said in that video reigns true right through this. I said in that video that this is because of a lack of leadership. What they said happened with the stolen artwork is that someone who got laid off, which we saw the layoffs, made the artwork and put together a portfolio, and this person that had their artwork stolen had their art on that portfolio, and when they got fired, it then got used in the game. To me, that is the art director's leadership problem, and of course the CEO leadership's problem as well. Now, how Sony can't come in and just get rid of Pete Parsons, I have no idea. I don't know that much, but yeah, this guy seems like an idiot, and especially like when they gave him that much money to keep and retain their employees, and then that doesn't happen. Huge, massive issue there, and that should be looked into legally, probably by Sony. So if Marathon flops, I'm curious if Sony does anything about it. And it's like at this point, it's gonna flop unless it gets delayed and then completely reworked. But it's what a story. What a story.